Hello, today I will persuade my audience why it was beneficial for England in the long run for King Henry VIII to divorce Catherine of Aragon. In the short run, Henry splitting England from the Roman Catholic Church was a horrible happening, but in the long run, the divorce made the country what it is today. Henry VIII had 6 wives in total. The first he sent to a nunnery, the second he beheaded, the third died giving birth to his son, the fourth was an amicable divorce, the fifth he beheaded, and the sixth and final outlived Henry. In truth, Henry did have too many wives, but the divorce from his first wife made England the country it is today. The church that Henry was put ahead of, the Church of England, is still in practice today. I have done a lot of research on the Tudor dynasty, and I have done a lot of presentations on the members of this famous royal family. This topic may not seem relevant to my audience, but I think it is important to know your past so you can better understand your present. Before I get into the divorce and how it changed England, I have to talk about a little history, since a lot of you may not know who King Henry VIII is. You need to have a little understanding of who Henry VIII is to better understand this speech. It is important to know the history about King Henry VIII to understand what I am saying. I will go from when he was a child until he died in a shortened, condensed version of events. Henry Tudor was the second son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. Elizabeth and Henry had 2 sons, Arthur and Henry. Arthur was to marry Catherine of Aragon, who was the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the famed monarchs of Spain. After 16 years of negotiations, Arthur and Catherine were married in 1501, and this came from Arthur Tudor, Prince of Wales. Less than a year later, Arthur fell ill and died. Catherine was left a young widow in a foreign country. The question whether the marriage was consummated was very important. Arthur's brother Henry got the marriage annulled on the grounds that the marriage was not legitimate because they never consummated their marriage. Catherine and Henry were married, and when Arthur and King Henry VII passed away, Arthur Tudor became Henry VIII, King of England. Henry was made king and married Catherine after his brother died. His father was a proud and noble king, winning his leadership of England on the battlefield. This was a good start for the Tudor dynasty. The marriage between Catherine and Henry started off very nicely, until a storm clouded into the marriage because Catherine could not produce a male heir. Henry was going mad with the fear of not having a legitimate male heir. All Henry wanted was a son. Catherine was not giving him one, so he was looking for answers. Catherine was only having miscarriages and stillborn babies. The only living child that they had was Mary. Henry fell in love with an enchanting woman named Anne Boleyn. Anne gave Henry empty promises that filled his head. She promised that she could give him a son if she was made the queen. And this came from The Other Boleyn Girl, a book by Philippa Gregory. Henry did everything in his power to prove that Catherine and Arthur did in fact consummate their marriage so that he could get an annulment, which is ironic since that is how he married Catherine in the first place, saying that they did not consummate the marriage. The cardinals saw through this, and they did not give Henry what he wanted. Since the Roman Catholic Church did not give Henry an annulment, he sought a divorce. A divorce from Catherine of Aragon would mean that Henry VIII would separate himself from the Roman Catholic Church. He and his country would be excommunicated. This was something very bad to do, because if you are excommunicated from Rome, you are excommunicated from God and your religion, since Pope is the religion and God. The people did not want this, and they loved Catherine. They thought Anne was just bewitching Henry. Henry did it anyway. He split from Rome and divorced Catherine. And this came from the Lives and Loves of the British Monarchs by Carroll. Henry got what he wanted and married Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn became the Queen of England. Anne and Henry had but one child together, and her name was Elizabeth. Anne and Henry did not have any sons, and that was about the end of Anne and Henry. Henry did not want to have another divorce, so he found grounds to behead Anne. He accused her of incest and adultery, which of course are treason. Henry VIII sought to rid of Catherine of Aragon because she could not give him any sons. Then, when he got his new bride, she also could not give him any sons. Henry was going mad with the desire for a male heir. Henry married 4 other times, and the only wife to give him a son was Jane Seymour, which was his 3rd wife, and she died in childbirth. Their son also died at a young age of tuberculosis. Henry never got his legitimate male heir, but it was his daughters that changed England, Mary I and Elizabeth I. I will now explain why the divorce from Catherine was beneficial. Henry VIII's divorce from Catherine of Aragon was seen as something horrible for a very long time. She was a beloved queen, and she was just sent to a nunnery. Catherine did receive unfair treatment, but in the long run it made England the country it is today. England used to be under the thumb of Rome, and after Henry divorced Catherine and started his own church, England was a truly independent country. The first good thing that came from the divorce was the Church of England. The person that gave the church a distinctive identity was Elizabeth I, and this came from an ancient church, Catholic and Reformed. England is proud to have its own country of its own without someone else ruling it, to have its own church, its own strong history, and to have something that is all their own. A quote from an ancient church, Catholic and Reformed, says, "So the church brings the grace of God with the whole nation through word and sacrament in the power of the Holy Spirit." The Church of England is what the royal family continues to practice. The church in which Kate Middleton and William Windsor got married. This is the most recent royal marriage. Maybe even more important than the birth of a new church was the birth of the little princess Elizabeth. She was Anne and Henry's daughter, and she changed England. Elizabeth I was made queen in 1558 after her half-sister Mary died, and she stayed queen until she died in 1603, and this came from Elizabeth I, Queen of England. Elizabeth was called the Virgin Queen because she never married. That in itself changed things, a queen without a king. Elizabeth was firmly in control of all major policies, and England prospered under a stable government. I'm going to read a passage from The Lives and Loves of the British Monarchs. Elizabeth was less than 3 years old when her father ordered the beheading of her mother, Anne Boleyn. Small wonder then that she grew up with a distinct desire never to let a man control her fate. She was undoubtedly the most educated and cultured queen of all English time, having formerly been declared a bastard after the inglorious fall of her mother. So after her father did that, she never let a man rule her fate, never getting married. The Elizabethan era is often referred to as the Golden Age. Elizabeth made England into a more stable country than it is today. She won battles, and she was strict yet kind. This is the time of Shakespeare, and she created great fashions and makeup. England is a better place because of Elizabeth I. These are the fashions that she created. She wore that big headdress, and she came up with makeup, like wearing whale fat as blush, which is kind of gross, but she made makeup. Since Henry VIII divorced Catherine, England truly became its own country. England also got one of the greatest rulers it had ever known, Elizabeth I. England is a wonderful country, and it is one of the oldest. There have been a lot of changes that made the country what it is today, but the horrible divorce made it something truly beautiful. Henry was infamous for all the wives that he had, and was sometimes seen as cruel and too passionate for different lovers. But Henry was famous for the creation of the Church of England and Elizabeth I. I know a lot of you will be listening and wondering why this is relevant. I believe it is always relevant to know the history so you can better understand the world you live in now. I hope I got some of you interested in this topic, and I persuaded you that the cruel act of ridding of Catherine helped England in the end.